Welcome to JoyTalk Radio.
Welcome to JoyTalk Radio.
Welcome to JoyTalk Radio,
where we come together to change the world
by challenging ourselves,
our beliefs,
and our systems
to get better results for generations to come.
What's on the agenda today, Joy?
It's how to stop manipulation so we can start changing the world. I think that's as good a place to start as any. It's highly relevant because we're in an election campaign that has me and most people around me pretty much mind-boggled as to what in the world is happening with our presidency. So the questions that I'd like to start with are, have you, the audience, and yourself, have you ever felt gamed and manipulated by the spin doctors of media and entertainment and the news? Have you ever experienced the emotional terrorism or the emotional trauma of having to fight with people who are polarizing you and tearing you apart and challenging, and then taking advantage of you when you and the other guy starts fighting and they just sort of rip you off? And the third one, that's how many of you have ever been played? You know, the right-wrong game is a perfect one. The good guy, bad guy victim story is a big one. The good cop, bad cop. You know, I mean, that happens everywhere. So I have, and there was at one point that I realized that it's all one big game, and it's a story that doesn't in fact work for anyone except the people who are making money on the game. And when I looked at it, what I realized is that the good guy, bad guy story permeates our entire culture today. It didn't used to, and it isn't necessarily a true story, but the story is being used in the media to sell products. It's being used in the sales world to sell goods and services. And the good guy, you know, the greater than, less than story is another version of that. The rich and the poor story, the masculine and feminine conflict. What we've done is we've institutionalized the education system to teach that as if it was true. I discovered that when I was talking to a professor from Western Washington University, Doug Banner, who was talking about a concept that he developed called story trapping. And it's about being able to identify the stories we tell culturally, historically, generationally, that affect how we see the context of the world around us, and that help us to identify what we do over time in our families and in our businesses and in our countries. And then I was down talking with Professor Philip Zimbardo at a writers' conference in San Francisco a few years ago, and I asked him about the hero story. He'd written a recent book called The Lucifer Effect. And in that, he ended up examining and studying the right and wrongs of things, how good people end up doing things that they don't necessarily want to be doing, but they do them anyway. And he was talking about some of the torture that was happening in the Abu Ghraib prisons. And he was an expert witness at that. And I went up to him after the conference and I said, if there was one thing that you could do that would truly change the future, change the world, what would that be? And he said, I would change the hero story. And that was the same thing that Doug Banner had been talking about when he was talking about changing the story. And I got to really looking at what is that hero story, and it's really the good guy, bad guy. It's the winner take all mentality. And it goes back to the idea that if you create a conflict between one party and another, the righteous to go over the other person, you can create the conflict, which creates the juice that makes it compelling so that people can be entrained, if you will, or enthralled or involved in the story. It's the emotional hook that we use in movies to compel people to take action or to continue to listen. So this story that we tell to keep the attention of other people actually perpetuates the conflict of the right-wrong or the winner-loser concept. And in fact, in the world we live in today, we can no longer afford the luxury of playing inside that storyline. We have to change our story because our world is a big, 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 big place. By 2025, our world's population is going to be 50% under the age of 21. That's a lot of children. And we need a lot of leaders to be able to help us mentor and manage the challenges we have on the horizon with climate change, with economic stressors, with the internet changing the game on every single level of our economy. And we need to learn how to change the story from being antagonistic and conflicted to being cooperative and collaborative. And so that's basically what I want to talk about today, is what's up with that and how do we change the game of manipulation. And a lot of people will say, well, let's not talk about it as a game because it's not funny. Well, no, it isn't funny. But when you use it to manipulate people to gain advantage, when you use it on purpose to dominate the market or to take over certain segments of the market or to hurt others, it becomes a game to the person, to the strategist themselves, the marketer, the media person, the person who is in charge of the game. They're playing the game, whether you, the victim, whether you, the consumer, or you, the businessman, or you, the whoever you are. We're the consumer of their game, but to them, it is a game. It's a game where they're playing economics, where they want to win the game and they want to take intentional action. And in fact, they plot their actions on purpose to gain advantage, to convince you to buy, to convince you to go here or go there or have an experience. And so to them, yes, it is a game. So today, what I want to talk about is how we have actually built an economy where we pay money to be gamed, to be bamboozled, to be sold a bill of goods. We pay money in the world of entertainment, in the world of the media, in the world of politics. And the better they are at playing the game, the more we will push the button or buy the goods or vote for them. We're almost like that Maslow's dog study that they like to talk about in psychology, and they give you so many rewards and eventually you learn to push the right button. Well, in the game of playing the game of marketing today, we can be manipulated into having the habit of buying. So we pay money to be victimized in our economy to win. And the people who have the greatest advantage in this game, which is part of why I think our economy is actually out of balance, is that the 1% can buy all the manipulators they want. They can buy the marketers. They can buy the spin doctors. They can buy the media. They can buy everybody. And so with that kind of an advantage, they can fleece the people. They can take over our taxes and use our taxes however they want. We have basically corruption in the emotional intelligence field. Through our emotional intelligence, we have become corrupted and we play into whatever game they want to play. So they take advantage of us and we've just been played and we don't even know we've been played. We just react. We actually end up fighting in our families over something happened on TV or in the soap operas. I mean, it's amazing. So how do we stop it? How do we stop the manipulation game? Well, what if we redirect the game and we take back our emotional energy? We recognize that these are emotional games that we're playing and we pay a price when we buy into them and just stop consuming those kinds of entertainment shows. We stop consuming those kinds of soap operas and those kinds of reality shows. Or we can change the money game to buy different goods and services. So we actually can figure out how to outgame them by doing real, authentic movies and authentic shows that give a real, honest return on investment for the time you spend. We can stop being victimized. Now, how do we do that? We diagram the money flow. We diagram how it is that they're gaming us. We diagram where the money goes when we buy what they tell us. And then we can redirect the game and change it from being a degenerative game to being a regenerative game. We can figure out what our root belief is and what we're buying into that allows us to be manipulated in the first place. What I started looking at when I started realizing that we were being gamed at such a level and that it was such a big, big business, I went, well, what is the root belief system that allows us to feel like we're being gamed? It's the idea of being right, wrong, or good and evil, or good and bad, evil and good. What is the root belief that allows us to be gamed and allows us to be victims of being gamed? What is it that we're buying into at the root, at the very core of our belief system that allows us to be manipulated and consumed basically by our emotional intelligence?
And the answer to that question came to me one day. I went to Whatcom Community College, and I was talking to this woman behind the counter there. I had been ruminating on my way over to the college about why in the world, I'd been sort of crying to myself, we were going to war in Iraq. And I went, why? Why are we going to war again in the 21st century when we know so much? Why are we going to war and creating more pollution? Why are we destroying our environmental world? Why are we killing people? We know better than this. So why are we doing it? And I just offhandedly said to her, why are we still perpetuating war when we know better? I mean, it's killing species, for crying out loud. It's killing our water supply. It's causing all these problems. And she said very calmly from the other side, well, that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. It's the war between the good and the evil. And besides, it's population control. We can stop the evil that's perpetuating. And, it's just a war between the good and the evil. And that just happens because it's always been that way. Humans just have to fight. Besides, we're predatory. And she went on. And I just sort of looked at her. I was taken aback. And I went, wow, is that true? Is that really true? She's like 18, 20 years old, and she is so certain. Here I am, 50, 55. Do I believe that's actually true? So for good and evil to be true, for the story of the good and the bad to be true, what is it that would have to be true in order for that to be true? What would I have to believe in order for that to be a true story? And what I would have to believe is really that there's a 50-50 equal balance between the bad guys and the good guys. And what's my reality of that? I got to thinking about it as I was driving home. And, I said, well, if that was true, how many people in my life, in my entire life, have I ever met that are bad? How many people do I know? And I would ask you to ask yourself the question and just think about that quickly. In your entire life, I don't care if you're 20 or 50, the proportions is what I'm looking at. In your entire life, how many people would have to be bad? Or have you had that are bad? In my entire life, I thought about it, and, maybe 3 that were shysters that had no conscience, and, they would just rip people off just because. And I had a girlfriend who had been murdered, so I knew somebody who had been murdered, and that guy was pretty bad. Not pretty bad, he was very bad. He was a serial killer. But then I thought, okay, so 3, maybe 5 people. By contrast, how many people had I met by that period of time in my life that were fundamentally good? And at that point, I'd been flying around the country and teaching at conferences and talking to a lot of people. So I figured I knew 100,000 people or so that I'd met at one point in time. And most of them were basically good people trying to do the right thing. And I thought, 3 or 5 to 100,000, what's the proportion of that? That's a bogus story. It's flat bogus. It's just not true. But we build an entire economy based upon the fact that we have to protect ourselves from these bad guys. It's just, that's a bogus economy. These are false beliefs. And just because we've been living by them for hundreds of years or thousands of years doesn't mean they're true. So I thought, wow, what's the greatest opportunity in the history of the world? It's to build an economy based upon the opposite of that. If most of the people in the world are decent, most of the people want to be good people, most of the people want to do the right thing, they want to make a difference, what they really want to do is have fun. Eat good food, take care of their families, dance, play, sing, have a good time. Why don't we build an economy based upon helping people do that? Why do we build an entire economy based upon insurance and banks and protections and locks and police and all this? It's a bogus economy. So I got to thinking, let's change the way we do business in the world. We can build an entire economy, an entire structure. We can build a complete replacement based on the healing arts, based upon relationships, based upon mediation, based upon learning how to get along in community. We can make the world a better place. We can love each other, do the right thing. The whole world changes. That's just basically what this whole show is about. That's what we're going to be talking about over the next period of time. And the idea of right, wrong, and good, bad, good, and evil is just, maybe it's true in your world. It certainly isn't in mine. So let's figure out how to make the world a better place.
With that, let's take a break. Be back in a minute. So I just dumped a whole bunch of the concepts into your guys' lap. So my question to you is, what do you think about that? What came up for you as we were talking? And am I out to lunch, or am I on course, or what are you thinking? Just any reactions?
I think you're right on target. We've been being victimized for generations by people that are bringing us to a place where we're actually paying them to victimize us.
Yeah.
And I see that going on more and more and more in our social structure, whether that be because of big corporations or the medical industry, whatever. It's all becoming more than we can handle, I think.
It's almost calcified. It's like our systems are stuck in this pattern almost. I mean, to me, what did some of the rest of you have comments?
Excuse me, just because we're used to war, because it's almost a habit, doesn't mean we can't stop it, doesn't mean we can't bring ourselves to a compromise. It doesn't mean it has to happen at all.
Doesn't mean it's right, does it?
Never. There's almost always a better alternative.
Yeah.
If we look for it, we'll find it. The
Yes.
question is, we have to notice that it's even possible. And if it's possible, then what would that look like? So anybody else?
But the change can't come suddenly. It's going to take a pattern of education, which is what you're embarking on. In other words, I always think that, well, if you just change the social contract, people will get the idea. Well, no, because people will start gaming the change in the social contract. So in order to resist that, before we change the social contract, you need to educate people on changing that core root belief, which is people are good or bad, people are good or evil.
So let's look at that for a minute. Okay, there's a pre-assumption that he has in the comment, and thank you very much for the idea, because one of the biggest things that people are afraid of is change, and they think that change is going to take a long time and that everything automatically has to take a long time. I'm going to challenge that pre-assumption. Once you recognize that someone is going the wrong way, or that you're going on the wrong way down the street, how long does it take to turn around? Typically, you can turn around in a second. If we're making the wrong action with someone, it is possible to change direction in a heartbeat. As a collective consciousness, we also can change. You know, notice that it can sometimes take one person taking one action in the community, one person standing up against something that's not right, and suddenly the entire person can, and the entire community can change course. So it is both true and not true that it can take a long time. Yes, I would say it can take a long time to change systems that we have spent 200 years putting in place. It can take a long time legally for the paperwork to change, unless, of course, we have one authority or we have one leader who changes their mind and chooses to change course. One father in a family, or one mother in a family, or one child in a family choosing to change the way they think, it's possible that changes the entire dynamics of the family.
You know, I recently read Power versus Force, which is an excellent book, talking about just this idea. And what it brings up for me in this discussion is that corruption in our emotional field, which was something that you said that really is, to me, we've each got to recognize our own emotional field and where it's been corrupted, so that what we can do is deconstruct our past and reconstruct our future based on what we believe is power versus force.
Yeah, the issue of emotional intelligence is actually a whole budding thing that has come out in the collective mind and, you know, in the conversation in the last decade or two. And it's become a truth that we do have emotional intelligence. We have instinctive intelligence. We actually, if you talk to people in the prison industrial complex, specifically the inmates, you know, we had a panel discussions one time where we had 3 or 4 people sitting on the panel, and we were talking about how, you know, at what point did people know that they made the wrong choice? And in all the people sitting on that panel, they said, absolutely, I had a muse on my shoulder. And that second voice in my head knew I shouldn't do that. And I did it anyway. And at every single point in time, we have these little subtle instincts that show up, and we know that we're out of integrity or we're out of balance. And as a culture, we know it too. We just have a habit pattern. So change is possible. It can be quick, and we can move.
The thing about change is we just have to provide a solution before you can't just say, here's the problem we're having a problem with here. Unless you're going to provide a solution, people are going to be scared to change because they have nothing to change to. If you provide these people with a solution, and we've talked about this before, Joy, if you have that solution for people to change to, it's a lot easier to make that change if they have a positive direction to head for and a solution to turn to.
We talk a lot about that in the high achievement or peak achievement coaching in high performance circles. You talk a lot about that in politics even, or in business achievement in any level, and certainly in addiction habits. You know, if you want to break an addiction, if you want to break a bad habit of eating too much, if you want to break the addiction of abuse, you have to have a replacement system or a replacement option so that instead of doing this, let's do that. Instead of hurting somebody, let's figure out, how do I stop the hurt? How do I stop the trauma? And how do I convert this situation? I just hurt someone. What in the world am I going to do about that? Not, I'm going to defend myself against what I did. I didn't do it. Don't blame me. I don't want to go to court. Don't sue me. Instead of saying, oh my God, I really did. I hurt you. I'm sorry. How bad does it hurt? What's the consequences? How can I help you? What can I do about it? How can I fix it? You know, what is an alternative? You know, if it's irrevocable, you know, you caused damage. It really did cause a problem. Denying that you did it doesn't work, really. Right. You know, really doesn't. No. And so being able to say, okay, I did it. What are the consequences of what I did? Whether I intended or not isn't necessarily the first point. The question is, the damage happened, someone got hurt. Now what am I going to do, and what is the direction I can go, and how can I recover, and how can I help them recover, and then how are we going to go forward? So building a new pattern of thought that is a different behavior pattern is really key to this good guy, bad guy story and the whole conversation of conflict.
You know, Joy, I was just yesterday in the courtroom, and I had saw something that I wrote down because it really hit me. The gal came in, the judge came in, and all of the lawyers were busily talking to each other, and she made it clear, look, it's time to gather yourselves together, go outside in the foyer area if you need to talk. It took them almost 15 minutes before they calmed down, and then they only stayed calm about 4 or 5 minutes, and they got right back to their little thing.
Wow.
Showing her no respect.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, what it did was it showed a cultural lack of willingness to observe a positive process where she was asking these young guys, do you understand what you've done? And how, you know, do you understand before you sign this piece of paper what your rights were? Did anybody coerce you? All of these very important dialogues. And there was so much noise in there that when it came time for my son to get up, I was already very unhappy with this situation. I got up and I said to the two lawyers who were standing in the way, I want to observe my son and I want to hear what's being said. And they were like offended by this. So I took offense, and then I said, no, you know what? What can we do with this? Because as you start to look at power and force, you realize you have the power to change everything in your life by your action. So I went out, I wrote this down, and when I get it completed, I'm going to take it to the judge's office, because it's my opinion that we let down our society when we do not keep those standards clear of how things are to be, so that we show each other respect. And it started right there that I saw that. And it was a very clear moment for me that all of this corruption and things in our area, they've all deteriorated to a point where it's in the fabric of our very day.
It's interesting that you say that, because most of the time when you go to court, you were in a particular kind of court. I think it was probably the arraignment court. Is that correct?
This was Superior Court.
It's Superior Court. Well, it's interesting because oftentimes what happens when you go to court is no one can talk. No one can talk unless the authority determines exactly what you can talk, what you can speak to, and what you have to say. And oftentimes the people who are on trial, or the people that have something to add to the conversation, we are not allowed to talk. And so authority has some real interesting twists and turns, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And cultural permission has some real interesting twists and turns. And oftentimes when we have a public defender, for example, the defender is working within a particular context of the government, and he has certain rights, or she has certain rights and privileges. And then they take action based upon what their cultural norms are in a community. And, I was talking to one defense attorney who one time said, once you call me, you shut up, you never get to say a word again. I will determine exactly what you do, what you're going to say, when you're going to say it, and who you're going to say it to. And I will be in charge of everything. You are not allowed to speak. You don't think. You don't talk. I'm in charge because I'm running the game.
Sherry
that
brought
was
that out last week.
What's that?
Sherry brought that out last week in her testimony about how she was treated. So it's that's true.
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch these perceived authorities and the privileges that we give people. Like, had I allowed this one person to be defended by that particular attorney, that victim or that client or that person, that defendant, would have had no subsequent voice, because that defense attorney's in charge. So go ahead, Clay.
I tried to provide facts and evidence to the authorities, simply trying to help them with their job, and they told me not to tell them how to do their job. When all I did, in my day-to-day work, I'm a welder fabricator. If a customer can give me measurements of their boat or pictures of their boat, that helps me in the process of building what I'm building. I simply provided facts and evidence to the authorities of a case, of a crime that was committed against me. I'm the victim in this situation. I provided them with evidence, and they told me, you need to stop telling us how to do our job.
Isn't that crazy?
There's something wrong there, because I can tell you that when my son, that night that my son was arrested, I told the police information that was very relevant. And do you know that now that we don't write statements any longer, it was all their testimony and none of mine when it came to the evidential review.
Oh,
and
interesting.
There was no evidential review from my viewpoint. And I was the person who was threatened and called 911. And yet I had no input in their report whatsoever.
Same thing in my report as well. Also, it specifically says a question that was asked of me, and my answer is not in the report. It just skips right past what I given a very valid answer, and it skipped right past it.
If I can say, this proves exactly what Joy is saying here, which is we have given up our ability to control this through a process of allowing the systems that we are part of to circumvent our choices through agreement.
Yeah, so in other words, I want to skip to a completely different piece of information, because a couple of you are dealing with the court system. This also happens in the commercial world. And it also happens in our budgetary world, and it happens in our civic systems. For example, I was listening to a debate among the county council where the executives of the council were speaking to the council, testifying how the process worked in this particular part of the budget. And specifically, one of the prosecutors stood up, and he was talking about the fact that for every case that comes through this county jurisdiction, the public defender only has 7 to 8 total hours with a case. 7 to 8 total hours on any major case. These are like felony cases. These are big deals, and we're making decisions. We have set up our systems. I mean, think about that. How absurd is that? You've got a person who could be going away for years. Lives can be radically changed. And there are certain witnesses that are never interviewed. There are certain situations that are never thought through. No one has the opportunity to actually sit at a table and figure out what actually happened. It's all determined on the turn of the way that a particular attorney chose to write a sentence, or it's determined on the particular way that a judge or the prosecutor chooses to make the charges or chooses to play the game. So what we've done, it's almost like, I mean, as I was listening to that, I went, wow, we've created an entire system that is outside of us as humans. This system is supposed to be serving us as humans, but in fact, we've given the authority to the system. The system is in charge of us, and they determine everything based upon the aptitude of the attorney, the judge, or the authority to use the tools and the skills of that system to win or lose a court case. And to me, that's like, oh my God, talk about the good guy, bad guy. Now we've given a system the right to be the determinant and the referee of what is right and wrong in our human system, and that doesn't work very good.
Well,
That's why we're guilty until proven innocent now.
Yeah, the systems have made it that way. What were you going to say?
I have so many things to say.
So speak.
Oh,
Talk to us.
I don't want to.
Speak.
Okay, so for me, like my family of origin, the educators who taught me as a child, just the whole cultural aspect of my family, the way I was raised, my great-grandparents, grandparents, my parents, and myself, anybody with a title is someone you listen to. I mean, we're conditioned to give our power to these people, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, a judge, whatever it is. And it's all a bunch of false beliefs. It's all a bunch of lies. And until other people can start to see that we have these false beliefs, and it's like this veil, until you can start to see through that or lift it and make your own choices about things, nothing can change. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes in all aspects and areas, not just the court system, not just the medical field, or and becoming your own advocate and knowing what your rights are is very important. So I have so many things to say about all of this stuff. But
exciting.
Too much time.
It's not too much time. The whole point of the radio show is so that we can in
crazy.
fact have these conversations.
Yeah.
Because it's learning from these paradoxes, I mean, beliefs keep us safe.
Yep.
Training and teachers can help us learn positively.
So when I was a kid, I grew up going to visit my dad in prison. So I wasn't afraid of prison. That was where my dad was happy and healthy, and you know what I mean? And so I became a deviant at the age of 18 and started committing crimes. I wasn't afraid to go to prison. It was kind of like a vacation. You know what I mean?
You're kidding.
Just because of how I was conditioned and what I saw.
You're really twisted.
Well, right. I mean, and that's a pretty
the
good
future.
example.
But that's not uncommon.
That's a pretty good example of what I'm talking about. Is like not having healthy fears and boundaries set up through my family of origin or through teachers, or creating that fear for comfort. And that's the twist on it, is making decisions based on fear because that's what you're used to, and then therefore allowing other people to make those decisions for you.
And based on reactivity.
Yeah.
The fear drives the hyperreactivity, and you get entrained to the hyperreactive action, and the reactivity and the hypersensitivity and the hyperdrama becomes the new normal.
And I want to thank you for
Hold
that.
on.
The reality of this, though, what she has just said, is not really that uncommon.
No.
There's a lot, I've seen that in other families and stuff too. I can relate in my family scenario. I did not find prison to be a vacation myself. I've never been to prison. I'm just saying it would never be a place where I would want to go or feel like it's a place that's okay to go. But other people in my family have definitely had that same feeling, so I can definitely relate. And what she's saying isn't as uncommon as some people might think. Your first reaction was like, oh wow, that's amazing.
Wow,
but it's not that uncommon.
No.
Well, we did have one of our people say, if you don't want to stay in prison, trust me, you can get out. But if you want to stay in prison, and have your food served to you, and you get happy, you've learned how to live within that context, it's safer to stay there than to get out, because at least you know the conditions.
Well,
and that's the
institutionalized big time. When my father was released, he came out and was walking down the street, and he didn't understand why somebody wouldn't move out of his way when he was walking down the sidewalk. Because when you're in prison, you walk in a straight line, everybody together, all in line, and you don't step in somebody else's way. He's walking down the sidewalk, and this other person isn't paying attention to him. He freaked out on the guy because he wouldn't move out of his way, because he's so institutionalized, he's been in there for so long, he can't understand the concept that somebody wouldn't move out of the way and isn't walking in a line with everybody else.
One of the things for me when I got to prison, why I say vacation is because the life I was living previous to that was a life of crime and drugs and violence and domestic violence and just not good. And so when I stood there in the courtroom and was sentenced to 5 years in prison, I was kind of relieved. You know what I mean? I was really angry when I got there. I had, now at this point, I guess it was about 9 months later, I still felt like something was going on with me that I'd never addressed before, whether it was taking away the drugs and alcohol or getting some mental health help or whatever it was, and I decided to start addressing those things. I mean, what a better time for me. All I had was time. And so what happened was that was the healthiest I'd ever been. I worked out every day. I ate right. I went to school. I did my mental health stuff, and I felt actually like a little bit of normalcy. And that's the institutionalized part, is getting out, and you had that routine, and you had all those aspects for a holistic approach to healing, and then you get out and you don't have those things. And so, you know, what is the first thing you want to do? Start running on fear again, making decisions based on fear and survival. And luckily I've never been back, and it's been 11 years, but since I've been in trouble. But I still work on that fear. I go to therapy. I work on those things because it's easier for me to let you make my decisions for me than for me to make a decision that might be wrong.
So what's interesting about that is that, in a way, people who are in favor of jails then could take what you just said and say it's much better to put people in prison and get them out of there because they'll get rehabilitated. And maybe that's true and maybe that's not, because what I heard you say is that because you were able to change the context of where you were living, before you were living in a very scary situation where you were being beaten or harassed and living survival. I mean, you were living in a very difficult situation. So being able to go into that particular prison and into that particular condition, and I want to notice that one thing I've learned from talking to people is that every single prison in this nation is completely different. And they're entirely different environments. And so by changing the context of what you were doing and putting you in a different context, it gave you a new worldview and a new way to start looking at stuff. And because you knew you were there and you are a resourceful person, you were able to say, okay, what am I going to make out of this? And you had a reset button, okay? Other people would have a different kind of a reset button. And so the whole point is to break these habits, you have to have a paradigm shift. You have to have a change in context, or a change in environment, or a change in belief systems. Change in people.
Support people.
Yes.
People say you're worth it, you're smart, you're beautiful, all the things that were never told to you, because you start believing that your parents are addicts, so you should be too. Your parents are convicts, so you should be too. So having that replay and readjust that thinking and replace it with something positive over and over and over and over for as long as I was in prison, having to practice that over and over and over, that's the only thing that kept me from going back, I think, is starting to believe that I was worth it.
And yet other people that are inside that jail or that prison are also abusing you, saying awful things to you and tearing you up. So you were able to notice that there was at least conflict and to start thinking for yourself about what the difference is.
And I think that that's what a lot of people with titles are afraid of happening. That's why they don't want jail reform. They don't want people getting help. They don't want people getting their voice back and becoming more aware of who they are and what they're worth. We are brilliant people with a lot to say. And so I think that they're the ones that are afraid of that.
So let's change the conversation. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to touch on that real fast. The reason they don't want change, they wouldn't have a job.
Yeah.
if we fix the problem.
There it is.
I-
So
That's
the
the
jobs
fact.
would
Job
the jobs would
security.
change.
The jobs would change, but let's be honest. Do we really want to have attorneys and lawyers and all this stuff?
Yeah.
If we have attorneys and lawyers, that means people are not treating other individuals properly.
Yeah.
So what if, let's just say this, because if we want to replace one habit with another, we've
Yeah.
got an entire economy that's based on this right-wrong game, on putting people in jail, on winning these corporate domination things. So what would be the replacement? Imagine that we built attorneys and created and built and increased the market for mediation attorneys, for relationship attorneys, for attorneys who could in fact help us build and write contracts that allow for division of the assets later.
And growth.
Restorative justice, growth, cooperation, collaboration. I've got a friend who's actually an attorney down in, or was an attorney in California. And he wrote a book called, the Resolutionary. His whole philosophy is about resolutionary legal things. And his whole position was, how do you write contracts that are there as a guidance system, not as a way to punish each other if you screw it up.
Yeah.
The contract is written so that the parties to the contract actually clarify what they want, how they want to get along, and everyone coming to the contract knows that at some point everyone's going to get out of the contract because life's going to change. The relationship is going to change in form. Accidents do happen. Bankruptcies do happen. There are failures here. There's a change in vision. So he writes into the contracts, how are you going to dissolve or morph the contract on purpose? So the whole point is proactive contracts.
That is the future.
Isn't that amazing?
That is the future.
I don't know. I feel like the hardest part is having everybody in agreement that no one's in control. I think that fear runs control, and
Yes.
so that therefore job security, fear of whatever, somebody always has to be in control, and that's the thing that could sabotage that whole contract idea.
Well, some of that idea is that people assume, okay, here, well, let's go back to these pre-assumptions.
Yeah.
The pre-assumptions is that we can control anything.
Yeah.
And the basis that we can control anything, that the market's controllable, that your jobs are controllable. Institutions are created to set up a control thing. So this goes back to assuming that any one of us is the controller of our life. And it's really scary to think that we're not. But if you look at nature, nothing is ever the same. There's not two conversations that you've ever had that are identical to any other conversation. Your breath that you bring into your body when you breathe in new air is bringing in a different set of air than you've ever breathed before. Everything in the world is based upon change, and everything in the world will change. So once we re-embrace the concept that everything is in the process of becoming something different, and everything that has been is in the process of dissolving and going away, now you have a different construct. So even if, let's take this out of the prison system and let's take it to the banking world. When I was, I don't know how old I was, let's say 30 years ago, savings and loans were a big deal. And there was a dramatic difference between a savings and loan and a commercial bank. And we didn't have stock options trading in the market. Nobody had even heard of stock options trading. So one of the things that I learned just about, it was maybe 10 years ago, just to put it in context, is I learned that stock options trading existed. Now, what are stock options? Stock options are something that I was taught as a commercial investor type person was a real scary thing. And the world had taught us that you don't invest in stock options. It's really scary and you can lose everything. It's really high risk. And I went, is that true or is that not true? Because I was talking to someone who was an options trader, and he was a trader on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. And he had learned, and he was teaching courses on how independent people could do stock options trading from their home office using the internet. And he made a fascinating comment at one point, and he said, do you know that it's like for a stock options trader just to be in business on the floor of the trading floor, he has to profit about 400% a month or a year. I can't remember what it was, but it was an extraordinary figure. Let's say it's a year. 400% a year in order just to stay in business to pay his bills. And yet, guess what we're taught in the middle class? We're taught that if we get a 10% return on investment in our mutual funds, we should be really grateful. So we're dumbed down to believe that a 10% growth rate on our investment is good.
And
so
it's good in
go
comparison to what your bank is going to give you.
Yeah, 1 or 2%. Yeah, of course. So comparatively, that's all true. So I went, what is this guy? This guy must be nuts. I mean, the guy, he's got to be crazy. 400%? You can't get 400%. How the heck could you do that? That's got to be really risky. That's got to be like gambling. So for a year, I did stock options trading. I went and took the courses to figure out what is stock options trading. Was he telling the truth? And is it possible to really get that kind of a return? And you know what I found out? In fact, it's safer to trade stock options than it was to buy stock. Because guess what? In stock options trading, you can bet whether the market goes up or if it goes down. You can actually make money if the stock goes sideways. You can make money if it goes both directions. And you can make dozens of trades on the same stock, spending pennies on the dollar, and heck, you can make 400% gains in a minute. But the average public doesn't know any of this. And the average public doesn't understand that there are people who all they do is trade stocks. And so to take this all the way around to the beginning of the conversation, 30 years ago, no, we couldn't do that. We didn't have technology. 30 years ago, stock options trading wasn't in the market. The markets have changed. The entire banking industry has changed. All the words that we use to different kinds of corporations, it used to just be an S corp, or it used to be, a nonprofit. Now you can actually do limited liability companies. Now you can do social benefit corporations. You can do all these things. So our entire market shifts and changes over time. And yet, depending upon when we got our education, who we got it from, and what we believe is true, we get these fixed ideas in our brain and we're not ready to change or embrace the possibility that something's different.
Once again, fear.
Fear of learning something different, fear of examining our beliefs, fear of looking at our systems and realizing the world's changed, folks. Let's change. We could do that. So that's what this radio show is all about. We're going to be coming and going from different subjects, different ideas all the way along. And I welcome you and thank you very much for showing up today. The world is changing. Everything changes. Our beliefs are changing. We have the opportunity right now to change our minds, to change our beliefs, to change our pre-assumptions, to change the game at every single level of the way the world works, no matter what country we're in, no matter what household we grew up in, no matter what jurisdiction we live in, we can change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on JoyTalk Radio.